They made the rejected Omega sing as a joke, but her voice stunned the Alpha King. I hope you're all ready for an amazing story today. Before we begin, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new video from our channel. It's quick, it's free, and it's the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic, heart-stopping stories. Your support means the world to us. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Now let's dive into today's tale. In the quiet village nestled deep in the woods, where the night was always pierced by the howls of wolves and the moon hung heavy over the trees, there lived a girl named Lyra. She was different, a rejected Omega, often mocked and ridiculed for being weak, unworthy of the attention that the alphas and betas demanded. She was told she would never matter, that her existence was just a shadow in a world of dominance. But Lyra wasn't as helpless as they thought. One evening, at a grand banquet held in the palace of the Alpha King, a cruel game was played. The nobles, with their sneers and whispers, decided to make a spectacle out of her. Let the broken Omega sing, they laughed, their voices dripping with mockery. They handed her a glass of wine, taunting her with the idea that she could entertain them like a circus animal. She stood there, humiliated, her hands trembling as the eyes of the room burned into her. Lyra had no choice but to step forward, the weight of their expectations heavy on her shoulders. She had been publicly ridiculed before, but tonight felt different. This was the moment when she could prove them wrong, or be crushed under their mockery forever. As she stood at the center of the room, she closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. She thought of all the cruel words, all the rejection, and something inside her snapped. She opened her mouth and began to sing, her voice soft at first, but then it grew, soaring through the air like a melody carried by the wind. The nobles fell silent, their laughter dying in their throats. The room was filled with the pure, haunting beauty of her voice. And then, something remarkable happened. From the shadows of the grand hall, the Alpha King himself, known for his coldness and unyielding power, stepped into the light. His eyes, usually sharp and full of command, softened as he listened. He watched her intently, as though entranced by the sound. When she finished, the entire room was still. Not a single soul dared to speak. The Alpha King's voice, deep and commanding, broke the silence. You are not what they say, he whispered. Your voice, it has the power to move mountains. The nobles, still in shock, watched as the Alpha King stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Lyra. Her heart raced, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had expected her to fail, to be humiliated further. But here she was, standing before the most powerful man in the kingdom, her voice, having done what none of them thought possible, captured his attention. You are mine, the Alpha King declared, his voice reverberating through the hall. From this moment on, I claim you as my mate. The crowd gasped, unable to believe what they were hearing. The rejected Omega, the girl they had laughed at, was now the Alpha King's mate. A twist of fate, a single moment had changed everything. And in that moment, Lyra realized that the path she had once believed was full of rejection and pain had, in fact, been leading her to something greater. She had found her place in a world that had once cast her aside. A new chapter had begun, and with it, the promise of a future she never thought possible. As the Alpha King stepped closer to her, Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't just a broken Omega anymore. She was his mate, and that was more than she ever dreamed she could be. The Alpha King's declaration rang through the hall like a thunderclap, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Lyra's heart raced as she stood there, still processing the words that had just been spoken. Her mind struggled to comprehend the enormity of the situation. The Alpha King, the Alpha King, had just claimed her as his mate, the very same man who had been a symbol of power, coldness, and fear to everyone in the room. For a moment Lyra felt like she was trapped in a dream, her body frozen as the eyes of the nobles bore into her. She wanted to speak, to ask if he was joking, but no words came out. She could only stand there, her breath shallow, her chest tight. The Alpha King, standing tall with his commanding presence, stepped closer to her, his intense gaze never leaving her face. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something soft, something unfamiliar. It was as though the walls he had so carefully built around himself were beginning to crack. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against her cheek. The touch was electrifying, sending a jolt through her body that she couldn't ignore. Her pulse quickened, and for the first time she felt the warmth of his touch, not as a ruler, but as a man who had seen her, truly seen her. "You have a gift, Lyra," the Alpha King said, his voice low and steady. "A gift that I have been searching for. A voice that can heal and touch the deepest parts of one's soul." His words were like a balm to her spirit, soothing the pain of years of rejection and ridicule. For the first time Lyra felt valued, not as an Omega who was discarded and ignored, but as someone with a purpose, with strength. "I see you," he continued, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "And I claim you as my mate, not just because you have a beautiful voice, but because you are more than they ever gave you credit for." The crowd, who had been so eager to see her humiliated, now stood in shocked silence. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of this sudden turn of events. Lyra's heart fluttered as the realization hit her. She was no longer the broken Omega that everyone had laughed at. She was his, the Alpha King's mate. It was unthinkable, yet here she was standing before him, her body still trembling from the weight of his words. He extended his hand, and she hesitated for a brief moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was strong, yet gentle, like the promise of something new, something powerful. As he pulled her closer, the air around them seemed to change. The tension that had once filled the room melted away, replaced by a quiet understanding. "Come with me," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, he led her through the hall, his hand never leaving hers. The nobles parted as they walked, their eyes following them, but no one dared to speak. Lyra couldn't help but feel the weight of their gazes, but in that moment she didn't care. She was walking beside the Alpha King, her mate, and nothing else mattered. They reached the grand doors that led to the royal chambers, and the Alpha King turned to her, his expression soft but serious. "You are mine, Lyra, and I will protect you with everything I have." The words hung in the air, a promise, a vow. Lyra nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She had been rejected by everyone, laughed at and belittled. But now she had found a place where she belonged. She had found someone who saw her not as weak, but as powerful. The Alpha King smiled, a rare and fleeting smile that made his usually stern face appear softer, more human. "You'll see," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "This is just the beginning." And with that, they entered the royal chambers together, ready to begin a new chapter in their story. A story of love, power, and fate. As Lyra stepped into the royal chambers, she felt a sense of awe wash over her. The room was grand, with tall, arched windows that allowed the moonlight to flood the space, casting a soft glow over the rich, velvet furnishings. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries that told the stories of the kingdom's proud history. But none of it mattered as much as the man standing before her, the Alpha King, who had just claimed her as his mate. His eyes never left hers as he closed the door behind them, the sound of it echoing in the stillness of the room. She could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of it all pressing down on her. For so long she had been invisible, overlooked, rejected by her pack, her own people. But now she stood before the most powerful man in the kingdom, and he had chosen her, not just for her voice, but for who she truly was. The Alpha King turned to face her, his expression unreadable, his posture commanding, yet there was a softness in his eyes that she hadn't expected. "You are more than just a healer, Lyra," he said, his voice steady but filled with an emotion she couldn't place. "You have something within you, something that I've been searching for." Lyra's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming, his eyes never leaving hers. "There is a power in you, a strength that has been buried, hidden beneath the weight of your past," he said. "You've always been told that you are weak, that you are nothing. But I see the truth in you. I see the woman you are becoming." His words stirred something deep inside her, something she had long buried under layers of pain and rejection. For the first time she felt seen, truly seen for who she was. The Alpha King's gaze softened as he reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand. I know the pain you've endured, the suffering you've carried, he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her cheek in a tender gesture. But that pain does not define you. You are not your past, Lyra. You are the future. Her eyes filled with tears, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. How could this be real? How could she, a rejected Omega, be standing here with the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom, who saw her for who she truly was? I never thought I could be more than what they said I was, Lyra admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. I never thought I could be enough. The Alpha King's gaze hardened with resolve. You are more than enough, he said firmly. And I will make sure you know it. I will make sure the world knows it. He stepped back slightly, releasing her from his touch, though his eyes remained locked onto hers. From this moment on, you will never be alone again. You will never have to hide who you are, what you are, ever again. I will stand by you as your mate, as your king. Lyra's heart swelled with emotion, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of, the moment where everything changed. She was no longer the rejected Omega, the invisible girl. She was the Alpha King's mate, and nothing would ever be the same again. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadying as she looked up at him. The Alpha King smiled, a rare and genuine smile that made his usually stern face soften. Now we begin our journey together, he said, his voice filled with quiet strength. We will face the challenges that lie ahead, but we will face them together. You and I, Lyra, as equals. With that, he turned and led her to the grand balcony that overlooked the kingdom. The moonlight bathed them in its silvery glow as they stood together, side by side, looking out over the vast lands below. Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her, the weight of her past finally lifting. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged, like she had found her place in this world. The Alpha King had claimed her, but more than that, he had given her something priceless. Acceptance, love, and a future. As the moon hung high in the sky, Lyra knew that this was only the beginning of their story. A story of power, love, and destiny. I hope you're ready for what's coming next, because Lyra's journey is just beginning. As days passed, Lyra found herself adapting to her new life beside the Alpha King, Kale Thornridge, who had claimed her as his mate. The palace, once a place of cold authority and endless formalities, was beginning to feel like home. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living, surrounded by the warmth of the Alpha King's presence and the security of his protection. Yet, even though the Alpha King had promised her safety and acceptance, Lyra knew there was still a long road ahead. The kingdom, full of whispers and judgment, would not easily accept the union of a once-rejected Omega and their revered ruler. As they walked through the royal gardens one afternoon, the crisp air filled with the scent of blooming flowers, Kale's hand resting lightly on her back, Lyra couldn't help but wonder what others would think of her now. Do you ever think about what they'll say? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The Alpha King's gaze softened, his eyes meeting hers with a reassuring smile. Let them say what they will, he replied, his voice calm and steady. You are mine, and that is all that matters. Lyra couldn't help but feel a warmth spread through her at his words. It was a simple sentiment, but it meant everything to her. For so long she had been told she was nothing, just a discarded Omega. Now she was the Alpha King's mate, a position of power, even if the rest of the kingdom didn't see it that way. But what about the others in the pack? She asked, her gaze dropping to the ground. What will they think of me? Kale stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. The opinions of others don't define you, he said firmly. I know that better than anyone. People will always talk, always try to tear down what they don't understand. But I won't let them do that to you. His words filled her with a sense of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer the vulnerable girl who had been humiliated in front of the court. She was his equal, and together they could face anything. As the days turned into weeks, Lyra began to see her new life unfold before her. She had a place beside the Alpha King, and while the weight of that role was heavy, she no longer feared it. She had a purpose, and with Kale by her side, she knew she could rise to meet it. But even as she embraced her new position, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The Alpha King's past, the shadow that hung over him, was something he rarely spoke about. There were rumors, whispers of a curse that had followed him since he claimed the throne, a darkness that seemed to grip his soul. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of his study, Lyra couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. "Kale, what happened?" she asked softly, her voice hesitant. "What curse do they speak of?" The Alpha King's expression darkened at the mention of the curse, and for a moment, he seemed distant, lost in memories. He sighed deeply before meeting her eyes. "It's not something I like to talk about," he admitted, his voice heavy with a hidden pain. "But you deserve to know. When I took the throne, I killed my own father to claim the crown. It was a blood ritual, a fight to the death. And in that moment I unknowingly bound myself to a curse that has haunted me ever since." Lyra listened in stunned silence, her heart aching for him. She had known there was more to the Alpha King than his cold demeanor, but she had never imagined the depth of the pain he carried. "I've spent my life trying to rid myself of it, but it's always been there, lurking in the shadows," he continued. "And it's why I've never allowed anyone close. I didn't want to drag them into my darkness." Lyra reached out and gently placed her hand on his. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she said softly. "I'm here. I'm yours, and I'll help you face whatever comes. Together." Kale's eyes softened as he looked at her, the vulnerability in his gaze making his normally stoic expression falter. "You are more than I ever expected, Lyra," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed everything for me." In that moment, Lyra understood the weight he had been carrying all these years, the burden of a throne built on bloodshed, and the constant battle with the curse that had haunted him. But she also knew that together, they could face anything. The path ahead would not be easy, but as long as they had each other, they could find a way to break the curse and build the future they both deserved. The journey had only just begun, and there were still many challenges to overcome. But with the Alpha King by her side, and her by his, Lyra knew they would rise together, no matter what the future held. As the days passed, Lyra and Kale found themselves growing even closer, their bond becoming undeniable. The castle, once filled with cold tension and whispered secrets, now felt like a place of warmth and unity. They were not just the Alpha King and his mate. They were partners, standing side by side against whatever challenges came their way. Lyra's life had transformed from one of rejection to one of purpose, and with each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger. She was not just the Alpha King's mate. She was becoming a powerful woman in her own right, someone who could shape her own future. But even as their bond grew stronger, there were still whispers in the kingdom. Some were skeptical of their union, still holding on to old beliefs about the Omega's place in society. Lyra overheard these whispers in the hallways, in the markets, and in the courts. They were careful not to speak too loudly, but she could hear their doubts, their fears. The nobles, particularly, seemed unsure of her place in the Alpha King's world. Lyra had once feared these whispers, but now she found herself embracing the power of her position. She was the Alpha King's mate, and that meant more than just a title. It meant she had the power to shape the kingdom alongside him. But the road ahead was not without its obstacles. One afternoon, as the two of them walked through the gardens, a messenger arrived with urgent news. Kale's expression grew serious as he read the scroll, his jaw tightening. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine as she watched his face shift from calm to grim. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Kale turned to her, his expression hardening. "It's from the neighboring kingdom of Bravon," he said, his voice cold. "They are threatening to invade our lands. They've heard of the power I possess, and they want it for themselves." Lyra's heart raced as she processed the news. Bravon, a kingdom known for its strength and cunning, had always been a threat, but to hear that they were now moving against them was something else entirely. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kale looked down at her, his gaze softening for a moment. "We prepare," he said firmly. "I will not let them take what is mine, and I will not let them harm you." Lyra felt a surge of pride in his words, but also a deep sense of fear. She had never been part of a battle before, never truly understood the stakes of the world she had entered. But she was no longer the frightened Omega she once was. She was the Alpha King's mate, and she had a role to play in the fate of their kingdom. That evening, Kale summoned his generals, and Lyra stood by his side as they strategized their next move. The war was looming, and the weight of it all felt heavy on her shoulders. As the meeting progressed, Lyra realized that she had something to offer in this fight. She had always been told that she was weak, that she was only good for healing and singing. But now, standing in the war room, she knew that her strength lay not just in her voice, but in her ability to stand by Kale and help him lead. She had a purpose in this fight, and she would not let fear hold her back. The next morning, as preparations for battle began, Lyra stood by Kale's side, her heart racing but her resolve firm. The time for hiding was over. She would face this challenge with him, just as they had faced everything else together. As they rode to the front lines, Lyra could feel the weight of their destiny pressing down on them. They were not just fighting for their kingdom. They were fighting for each other, for the future they were building together. The battle was coming, and Lyra was ready to fight alongside her mate, to prove that she was more than just the rejected Omega. She was a force to be reckoned with, and together, they would face whatever came their way. I hope you're ready for the next chapter in Lyra and Kale's story, because things are about to take a dramatic turn. The battle with Bravon had arrived, and the kingdom was on the brink of war. The air was thick with tension as Lyra rode beside the Alpha King, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of hooves echoed through the plains, a rhythm that matched the beat of her heart. Kale's presence was a constant source of strength, but even he couldn't hide the weight of the situation. The kingdom of Bravon had gathered its forces, ready to strike at the heart of their land. But Lyra wasn't afraid. She had come so far from the timid Omega she once was. With each passing day she had grown stronger, more confident, and now standing beside her mate, she knew she was ready. The battle was inevitable, but they would face it together. As they approached the battlefield, Lyra's thoughts raced. She had never been a warrior, never held a sword or fought in a battle, but she wasn't helpless. She had a gift that could heal, that could protect, and that would prove invaluable in the coming fight. The armies of Bravon were ruthless, known for their cunning and their ability to crush their enemies without mercy. But they had underestimated Lyra. As the war horn sounded, signaling the beginning of the battle, Lyra took a deep breath and focused. She closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself, calling upon the power that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. Her gift was more than just healing. It was the ability to influence the very fabric of life itself. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the energy of the world swirling around her. It was a power that had always been tied to her, but now with Kale by her side, it was awakened in full force. She opened her eyes, and for the first time she saw the world differently. The battlefield stretched out before her, a sea of warriors clashing, but she could see more than just the chaos. She could see the threads of life and death, the energy that flowed through every person, every blade, every breath. And she knew what she had to do. Without a word, she raised her hands, and the energy around her responded. A wave of power surged from her, flowing into the warriors, healing their wounds, fortifying their spirits. The battle raged on, but Lyra's presence on the battlefield was like a beacon of light in the midst of the storm. The soldiers of Bravon faltered, unsure of what was happening, but the warriors of her kingdom fought on with renewed strength. Kale fought by her side, his eyes never leaving her as she worked her magic. He had always believed in her, but now, as she stood in the midst of the battle, he could see the true extent of her power. She was no longer the Omega who had been rejected. She was a force to be reckoned with, a queen in her own right. As the battle continued, Lyra could feel the curse that had haunted Kale begin to stir. It was not just the kingdom of Bravon that they were fighting against. It was the darkness that had been following him for so long, threatening to consume him. But Lyra would not let that happen. She would not let him fall into the shadows again. She reached out to him, her magic flowing toward him, reinforcing his strength, shielding him from the curse's grasp. For a moment, Kale's eyes softened as he looked at her, and she knew in that instant that they were truly one. The battle raged on, but it no longer felt like an impossible fight. With Lyra's power and Kale's strength, they were unstoppable. As the sun began to set, the enemy forces began to retreat. The tide had turned, and victory was within their grasp. But Lyra knew that the fight was far from over. There were still many challenges ahead, and the curse that had bound Kale for so long was not easily broken. But she was ready. With Kale by her side, they would face whatever came their way. Together they were a force of nature, unyielding and unstoppable. As the dust settled on the battlefield and the echoes of clashing swords began to fade, Lyra and Kale stood side by side, victorious. The enemy forces had retreated, broken and disoriented, their morale shattered by the unexpected power Lyra had unleashed. The soldiers of their kingdom cheered, their voices rising in triumph, but for Lyra, the victory felt bittersweet. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The darkness that had been tied to Kale, the curse he carried, was still very much alive, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lyra could feel it, a constant pressure against her senses, as if something unseen was pulling at the very fabric of their connection. She knew that defeating Bravon was just the beginning. As they made their way back to the castle, Kale's expression was unreadable, his eyes distant as if his mind was elsewhere. Lyra couldn't help but wonder if he was thinking about the curse that haunted him, the darkness that had claimed his soul so many years ago. They entered the grand hall of the castle, the silence of the aftermath settling over them. Lyra watched as Kale turned to face her, his gaze heavy with the weight of everything they had just endured. "You were incredible today," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I've never seen anything like it." Lyra shook her head, her heart still racing from the intensity of the battle. "It wasn't just me," she replied softly. "We fought together. And we won together." Kale smiled, the corners of his lips lifting ever so slightly. "You've changed everything for me, Lyra," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You've shown me that there is more to me than the curse, than the darkness. You've given me hope." Lyra's chest tightened at his words, the depth of their bond clear to her in that moment. She had always believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. And now, standing here in the quiet of their victory, she knew that they were stronger than anything that had ever tried to tear them apart. But even as she felt the warmth of his presence, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of her mind. The curse was not something they could simply wish away. It was a part of him as much as the throne he sat upon. "Kale," she said gently, stepping closer to him. "The curse. It's still here, isn't it? It hasn't gone away." Kale's expression darkened, and for a moment, the hardness of the Alpha King returned to his features. "No, it hasn't," he admitted, his voice filled with a quiet anguish. "It's something I've carried with me for as long as I can remember. And every time I think I've rid myself of it, it comes back stronger than before." Lyra reached out, her hand brushing against his arm, grounding him. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she said, her voice firm with determination. "We'll face it together, Kale. We've already proven that we're stronger than we thought. You don't have to do this by yourself." For a long moment Kale said nothing, his gaze fixed on her, as if searching for something in her eyes. And then slowly he nodded. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't want to face it alone. I never did." He took her hand, holding it firmly in his own. "Together then," he said softly, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. And in that moment Lyra knew that they were truly united, not just in love, but in their shared strength, their shared fight. The curse may have haunted them both for so long, but now with each other by their side, they would face it head-on, and nothing would stand in their way. As the days passed, Lyra and Kale prepared for what was to come. They knew that Bravon's defeat would not be the end of their struggles. There were still enemies to face, still obstacles to overcome, but they also knew that they were no longer fighting alone. They were a team, a force to be reckoned with. And as the moon rose over their kingdom, Lyra stood at the window of the castle, looking out at the horizon. She could feel the weight of their future, the challenges they would face together. But she was no longer afraid. They had already proven that they were capable of overcoming anything, and as long as they stood together, they could face whatever the world threw their way. As the weeks passed, the kingdom settled into a fragile peace, the echoes of the battle with Bravon still fresh in the minds of the people. Lyra and Kale stood stronger than ever, united not just by the bond of mates, but by the shared experiences that had shaped them both. Kale's curse, though still present, no longer felt like an insurmountable obstacle. Together they had learned how to manage it, how to fight against the darkness that threatened to consume him. But Lyra knew that their fight was far from over. She had always believed in Kale, in his strength, but now, as they prepared for the next phase of their journey, she understood the depth of what lay ahead. The curse was not just an enemy to defeat. It was a part of Kale's very being, something that he had to live with every day. And Lyra would stand by him every step of the way. One evening as the sun set over the castle, Lyra stood by the balcony, watching the horizon as a gentle breeze ruffled her hair. The world seemed at peace, yet the weight of the coming days was never far from her mind. Kale joined her, his presence a comforting presence at her side. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly, his voice laced with concern. Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of determination and love. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about everything that's ahead of us. We've faced so much already, but I know there's more to come." Kale looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before his hand gently cupped her cheek. "We will face it together," he said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "Whatever comes, we will face it as one." Lyra nodded, the strength in his words filling her with resolve. She knew that together they could overcome anything. But the road ahead would not be easy. As the days turned into weeks, news arrived of a new threat. A dark force had begun to rise in the east, a kingdom that had long been a silent enemy of Kale's. The Alpha King had worked tirelessly to keep the kingdom safe, but even he couldn't predict what this new threat would bring. It was said to be a dark magic, a curse even stronger than the one that had haunted him for so long. Lyra's heart sank as the news was delivered to them. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice filled with dread. Kale's expression darkened, but his resolve never wavered. "It means that we must prepare for war," he said, his voice firm. "We will not let this new threat destroy everything we've fought for." Lyra felt the weight of his words, the magnitude of the challenge they faced. But as she looked at him, she saw the strength that had always been there. The warrior who had fought for his people, for their future. "We will not let them destroy what we've built," she said softly, her voice full of conviction. "We will fight for each other, for our kingdom, for our future." Kale smiled at her, a rare expression that made his usually stern face soften. "I knew you were the one," he said, his voice low and filled with affection. "Together we can face anything." And so the preparations for war began. Lyra and Kale, side by side, led the kingdom in the fight against the dark forces that threatened their land. The kingdom rallied behind them, inspired by the strength of their leaders, their bond as mates. Lyra, once an Omega rejected by all, had become the heart of the kingdom. Her strength, her courage, and her love for Kale had made her a queen in the truest sense of the word. The battle that lay ahead would be their greatest challenge yet, but Lyra knew that together they would overcome it. With each passing day their bond grew stronger, and the darkness that threatened them seemed a little less frightening. As long as they stood together, Lyra and Kale knew that no enemy, no curse could break them apart. Their love, their strength, and their shared purpose would carry them through whatever trials lay ahead. The days leading up to the battle were filled with tension, but Lyra and Kale remained steadfast, preparing their kingdom for the fight ahead. The dark force that threatened their land had grown stronger, but so had their resolve. The kingdom rallied behind them, inspired by the Alpha King and his powerful mate, who had proven that even in the darkest of times, love and unity could triumph over all. The time had come. As Lyra stood at the head of the army, her heart pounding in her chest, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. But she was no longer the timid Omega she had once been. She had become a queen, a leader, and with Kale at her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. The battle that awaited them would not be an easy one, but they were prepared. The ground shook as the two armies met, the clash of steel and the cries of warriors filling the air. Lyra's heart ached as she watched the chaos unfold, but she kept her focus, knowing that her role was just as crucial as the warriors fighting on the front lines. As Kale led their forces with unmatched strength, Lyra stayed close, using her gift to heal and protect those who fell in battle. Her power had grown over the months, her connection to the earth and the life force of the world stronger than ever. With every breath, every movement, she felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, guiding her, empowering her. And as the battle raged on, Lyra could feel the curse that had plagued Kale for so long beginning to stir. She could sense the dark magic, the force that had been tied to him since he killed his father, rising once more. It was stronger now, more menacing than ever before. But Lyra would not allow it to take him. She reached out, her magic flowing toward him, wrapping him in warmth and light. She could feel the darkness trying to pull him under, but she held on tight, refusing to let go. "You are stronger than this, Kale," she whispered to him, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "We are stronger together. I won't let this curse destroy us." Kale's eyes, filled with pain and determination, met hers, and for a brief moment the darkness seemed to recede. Together they were a force of nature, unstoppable. The battle continued, the enemy forces falling one by one as their strength faltered. Lyra and Kale, united by their love and their purpose, had proven that no curse, no enemy, could break them apart. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the battlefield, the last of the enemy forces finally surrendered. The battle was won. But even as the kingdom celebrated their victory, Lyra knew that the true fight was just beginning. The curse that had haunted Kale for so long had not been fully broken. There was still work to be done, still darkness to defeat. But with Kale by her side, she knew they could face anything. Together they had overcome so much, and together they would face the future. Lyra stood beside Kale as the soldiers cheered, the weight of their victory settling in. She could feel his hand in hers, strong and reassuring. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Lyra felt a sense of peace. They had proven that love, unity and strength could conquer even the darkest of forces. And with that knowledge they would move forward together into the future they had earned.